Welcome back to Priceless Advice with Leaders of Volunteers. I am your host, Dana, and I am absolutely delighted today to chat with Karen Knight up in British Columbia. Hi, Karen.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. So I want to let folks know our fun backstory because some months ago, last year, you reached out to me saying, "Hey, can we just have like an informational interview and a little chat about consulting and content creation and just kind of get to know each other beyond LinkedIn and social media stalking and running in a lot of the same circles and knowing a lot of the same people." And I'm always up for stuff like that to get to know colleagues better near or far, and, especially ones up in British Columbia because
Yay!
I love that area. I have friends and family up there, and adding to friends and family up there is always delight. And we had a great hour-ish conversation, and we probably should have recorded it, but we did.
Probably.
It was really great. Trust me, everyone. It was amazing. We'll do our best to recreate it today. And one of the things that you wanted to do when we had that conversation, now maybe not quite a year ago, but some months ago, was you were really interested in launching writing and writing consistently. And I take zero credit for your accomplishments, but I've just been really enjoying cheerleading from the sidelines of cyberspace that you've written for Engage Journal. You're writing blogs just about every week. You're really great at that consistent content creation and doing that from a video media perspective. I know how much work just goes into writing alone. And so the fact that you've been able to do all this. So how does that feel, kind of starting to make that dream come true?
It's wonderful, actually, and you are an inspiration. And I have to say, I admire you incredibly for not just writing it, but actually recording it, because I don't think I would have the gumption to do that. But no, the writing, it's actually been so much fun, because once you get into it and you start looking for topics and looking for what interests people, there's so much, and there's so much, it just kind of eye-opening. I end up going down these rabbit holes and finding all sorts of things and doing research and learning stuff. I love learning. Well, as you can see, for those who are seeing it, you can see behind me, I love learning.
A good library collection back there. I like the depth of field of the bookshelves.
Yeah, it's good, but yeah, no, I'm learning so much about the field just by making myself write, and it's really opened it up. It's been wonderful to do.
And the first priceless advice I ever did, when I had this harebrained idea of how to talk to my friends more often, and that really was a selfish excuse to, like, I really just want to see my friends in person and talk to them more often. And it was with Mr. the Rob Jackson in London in 2020, right before the pandemic. It was January 2020, and his thing has been write, create content, even if you're writing 200 words at a time, because he has, I think, it's like 200 Word Tuesday. He and Aaron have
Yeah,
started. And as an editor, the primary editor now of Engage Journal, which was Energize Inc., and then
it
Nancy
it
McFarland with
was
the DISA,
out
managers
of
the
the blue,
archives.
to be
But
completely
we all
honest. I
kind of
had
know each
written a
other at a
blog,
certain
just a
point
short,
in this
my
sector if
blogs
we're
tend to be
writing
about
and
between 500.
conferencing and consulting and speaking and stuff like that. And I think it's important for our colleagues to know, how do you, because I think that it can feel like, how do I break into writing for Engage? Do you have to know somebody? Do you have to be friends with Rob? And so what's your experience of getting those opportunities to write articles, in addition to your own great blogging?
It was out of the blue, to be completely honest. I had written a blog, just a short, my blogs tend to be about between 500 and 800 words, just short things. And I did one on compassion fatigue in the volunteering space. And Andy Fryer reached
Mm.
out to me and said, would you expand on it? And this is what the article is all, or the journal is all about, and the rest of it. And would you be willing to do that? And I jumped at the chance. And then I started writing. And because I usually only write 500 to 800 words, to write 2,500 was a real challenge. I actually wrote 2 different blogs and then kind of cobbled them together
Fix it in
to
post.
make
You
it
can know
work.
editing is magic. You just, whatever kind of media you're in, whatever you're creating, you fix it in post. You make it, you put it together. And Andy's delightful, and I have met Andy in person, although I haven't had a chance pre or during or hopefully post pandemic to travel to Australia to see him. But I've seen him when he's been in Canada and doing things for better impact and engage and conferences, and how wonderful to be
I
tapped
know.
as
I was
talent.
so honored. And that was fairly new in my writing career, if you would. I think I'd probably only written a dozen or so blogs prior to that. So
Mhm.
it really took me by surprise. It was quite an honor.
What are some of the more challenging things you found to write about, or challenging topics? Has there been anything in your blogging that might even still be on a back burner? You're like, that's too much of a hot potato, or that's gonna cause. I think this is gonna cause a reaction that I don't want, and I'm not ready to write about it yet. Has anything been a little bit in the danger zone for you?
Not yet. I I tend to just trample in when I have an opinion. I don't generally have a problem
I do
expressing.
that too, but I don't always recommend it, but I do that too. Yeah.
uh, and what's really surprising, even when I post something that I think might be a bit edgy,
Yeah.
it's often those ones that get the most applause. Well, applause is the wrong
Yeah.
word, but a lot people share it and comment on it and react in good ways
Right.
because nobody's bothered to talk about it before. And
Or
finally it's opened and now it's not taboo. Somebody's talked about it, so now I can.
I found that to be the case as well, where again, I'm not afraid of conflict or confrontation, but I'm very mindful to not um, punch down accidentally or speak against someone, or speak of or use a term or a language around their group or their skills or their background that's out of date, or not used by the group themselves, because there's a lot of labels that get imposed from the outside or mainstream culture onto historically marginalized groups, or groups that go in and out of social public favor. And being a part of some of those groups myself, I've been very mindful of how language evolves again just in the last 5 years, 10 years,
Yes.
especially 20 years. um, and there and yet my reputation being what it is, and your personality being similar, I still try to catch myself. I'm like, am I really going to step in it if I say this? And I said something during an international conference meeting, membership meeting last week, and there were other people that I knew that were in the chat, but I didn't know the people running the webinar. And I'm like, the Reddit thread, am I the asshole? And I'm like, am I about to just like be that person? But the way I asked the question about, and I actually put this in a larger LinkedIn social media post of, how do you plan conferences in places that feel unsafe to people?
Right. I remember that
And
post. Yeah.
yeah, it was just this about a week ago, a week before how we're recording this, and Faiza, Van Zant, and Karen Reich, and like a bunch of other friends and colleagues that I've known forever, messaged me in the chat like, I'm so glad you said that out loud because we were thinking that too. So I think having that courage to, it's like, well, I know I'm not punching down, but I might, accidentally embarrass or put someone on the spot where I don't know them, and they're doing this nice webinar for us in good faith just to get us caught up on stuff. And to their credit, they said, that's not really the topic of this webinar, but let's talk offline. And we did. We had a nice email
Right.
thread, and I made my points, and no one was attacked or had their feelings hurt. But it takes that a little step of courage. So when you just kind of jump into something, do you have that moment of second guessing yourself, or do you just go for it and like do it now, apologize later?
With the topics, I go right ahead, but
Mm-hmm.
I do take the time before I open my mouth to make sure the language is right so
Mm-hmm.
that I don't offend anybody in any way that I know that I could I could offend. So I vet my language, but not necessarily the topic, if that
Mm-hmm.
makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't have a problem saying certain countries in this world are not ones whose culture that I appreciate.
Yeah. Or
There
who
are things
would feel
about
safe
them,
visiting. Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
I don't have a problem saying that, but I'm not going to say their culture is bad or it's this. It's I'm not comfortable with it.
Right.
Right.
Right. And just kind of travel in general can be iffy in pandemic times, as we all know. And I'm still doing as much remote work in appearances and speaking as I can. And you were doing a little bit of conference travel. Has that been within Canada, or are you coming down to the States for
With
any of the big conferences?
when I haven't done any conferencing in the volunteer space, but when I was with Toastmasters, I went
Mm,
to conferences, and that was all over the States and all over Canada. So I've done that, and it's an international organization, so there were
right.
people there from all over the world, and I've got friends all over the world, which is a wonderful thing.
Which is a wonderful thing, which is kind of why I started this whole program, is to talk to my
Yeah.
friends all over the world. One thing that I always like to bring up when I'm talking to someone who has their existence outside of the United States of America, but kind of nearby, like Canada does, what do you see are the big differences, good, bad, or neutral, between volunteer engagement and kind of how the sector functions in the United States and how it functions in Canada?
For the most part, I think we're pretty similar. Canada has an extraordinarily strong volunteering culture, uh, probably one of the best in the world. According to Stats Canada, our government statistical gathering body, uh, 78 in 2018, which was the last time they did this, 78% of Canadians had volunteered in that past year, which is an extraordinary number. Now, obviously, the pandemic's changed a ton of that. But other than just the sheer numbers, I think how we engage our volunteers and how we work with them is generally the same. We work with the same, we all have the same heroes in the field and things, Susan Ellis and all those people. That we look to for best practices. The CVA accreditation, things like that are really quite similar here as they are in the States. The one area, and this is not volunteering in general, but the one area that I really see a huge difference is in disaster management.
Yeah.
So volunteering in the aftermath of a disaster. And I think part of that in British Columbia, every municipality must, it's legislated, you must have an emergency management system with a whole thing set up and ready to go if there is a massive flood or if there's a fire or there's whatever, earthquakes. The whole government comes in from the provincial level, the federal level, and the municipal level, all come in, and it's all organized. Now, from what I understand in the States, it's very different.
Oh,
That
it's very different. That's a good way to put it. Very different.
that there really isn't any oversight, and it's up to an individual or a group to come in and deal with that sort of thing. Um, and that's always seemed odd to me
It,
anyway.
it it seems odd from the inside, and I can confirm that in that I've often worked with government agencies, and part of our purview has been how to respond to certain California specific disasters, earthquakes, tsunamis, usually working in coastal California communities, wildfires, that type of thing. Sometimes mudslides and flash flooding, but those are like the big three seasons. There's kind of a joke in California that the season is drought, fire, flood, mudslide, earthquake. So we get 5 seasons in the year, but we don't get snow, but we get earthquake instead of snow. And It's true. I was just having a conversation in a different colleagues meeting this morning of how theoretically all of these disaster response, state by state, at the federal level, and usually at the local, regional, municipal, city level, all of these structures exist, but nobody does them or does them right. And a lot of pieces of local government or large nonprofits that should be better plugged into these theoretical government systems that nobody ever really does does correctly. And so we have things like, VOAD, volunteers in disaster recovery. So we have a lot of organizations. And this morning, the conversation with my other colleagues was around the medical corps, that state by state, there is supposed to be, and in some states do this better than others, a medical volunteer reserve corps that hospitals know about and that state and regional governments plug into, that are not just disaster trained volunteers, but a pool of volunteers that are doctors or nurses, or highly skilled, and also general people who have just enough kind of neighborhood emergency response training. But it's supposed to be a well-oiled machine, and there's probably 5 out of our 50 states that do it really well. And California is not one of them, I can say. There is this thing in America where I think something that's been a potential blog post, if I ever have time between recording videos, but maybe I'll just hand this idea to you and you can take the Canadian version and I'll take the American version, is because there just is not a functional social safety net in our country, not to the degree of Canada or Europe, or most developed nations in the world. We do not have a public health care system. We do not have, for the most part, other than state by state, guaranteed income or a good income welfare safety net or food safety net. And having a pandemic, having political divisiveness, having economic downturns, handling climate change, all of those things compounding at once is putting so much strain on nonprofit and voluntary sector and healthcare sector and disaster sector when we're already spread so thin, that to me, like, it's just part of it's already snapped, but like something in the volunteer sector is just going to snap, because there's only so much you can ask people to do, even as very dedicated volunteers in their immediate communities, before everybody's just too tired or burned out or literally sick or can't do it anymore, because they do have to work 3 jobs because there's no social safety net. So maybe we co-blog on that, but that's my little mini rant about
No, I'm
stretched too thin. We get
yeah,
stretched
well,
thin.
they are. And I think part of that is our own fault as leaders of volunteers. We get a few superstar volunteers and we end up piling more and more on them because we know they'll do it and they'll do it well. And then we neglect training or bringing on others because we've got somebody who will do it all. Mm-hmm. And then when that person burns out and disappears, we go, what do we do? Right? We need to make all our volunteers superstars. And that's training, that's onboarding, it's job shadowing, it's all of this stuff. We have to think of everybody as a superstar and get them to that point. And then we won't have the burn. We have enough volunteers. There are enough people out there who want to volunteer. We need to bring them to that level. And that's on us.
And I think it goes back to some points from the start of our conversation and some of the Tuesday tips that we include in this conversation, which is, well, one, we're bad at legacy planning in general and talent development pipelines, because there just often isn't the bandwidth. If we're a department of one, it's hard to be like, how does this legacy planning work? But it's so crucial to do that. And also that idea of letting go of that idea of, this is my volunteer and this is my expert, and Jackie has been here for 30 years. She helped found the agency. She's a priceless archive of information. So let's just put all our energy into Jackie. And it's like, actually, let's put some energy into Jackie telling 10 more people what she knows. And then those 10 people tell 10 people, and so on, to borrow from a shampoo commercial from ages ago. And so they tell 2 friends and they tell 2 friends. And
two
so
friends, on. Yeah.
But
I remember that one.
Yeah. We're in we're in the same generation. We get these Gen X jokes, these inside jokes. And how do you, in your practice and being a leader of volunteers, how have you kind of built up the trainers talent pool with your organizations, and then now consulting? What are some of your techniques around that, or just advice on how to do it?
I think the thing that I recommend first, like the first step to all of this, is to get your board on board. To
Get the board
get
on
the
board.
senior
Hashtag board on board. Yep.
yeah, is get the senior staff and the board of directors behind you. Because if they see the value of well-trained volunteers, then doors open that would otherwise be closed. Right? If they're supporting you, even if it's not financially, but if they're supporting you with the whole idea, then you can find the time, then you may get extra budget money, all of this sort of thing that otherwise might not be there. So you have to be really good at advocating to the senior staff and the board. Because once you do that, then everything else opens up.
And falls into place.
That would be my, if you can't do anything else, do that, and then everything else will open up.
I think that's a great place to start if someone doesn't know, or it can feel really overwhelming. Like, what do you mean I have to develop a? You have to get that buy-in from the top. You have to manage up and get the board on board. Hashtag it's our new hashtag going viral. And the other piece of that I think gets overlooked too often. I get tapped a lot for board development or Friends of Citizens Advisory Committee development. I have a lot of experience in that. Board members are often also volunteers. Sometimes they're elected, sometimes they're stipended. I've been on board. I'm a volunteer board member for like 4 or 5 different things at any given time in the last 20 years. I'm usually on a board of something somewhere, volunteering my time. And whether that's a fundraising board, a working policy board, or which is the ones I don't like to be on or participate in, the phone it in and put it on your LinkedIn and don't really ever do any work kind of board. Because those are the 3 kinds.
I've been lucky. All the ones I've been on are working.
All the ones I've been on have been working at policy working leadership boards. And that's important to define. And I have encountered, tell me if this has been true in your experience, that people just forget that the board are volunteers, and we as board members, like sometimes I've come into organizations and say, can we track my hours? can I, especially if it's a little outside of the sector, like an art, like I've done like a lot of, arts institutes and things like that. And over the years, or other like political activism or advocacy, like, can we just keep track of who's really showing up to the meetings and who's doing the work? Have you run into stuff like that?
Yeah. I almost wish I had.
Okay.
because what I'm seeing most is, okay, you're on the board, so you're a boss, and therefore we'll just let you do your thing. And yet the people that get on the board, and most boards are desperate for anyone to come and serve.
And do any amount of work. Yeah.
Exactly. And so, people, it's never part of the conversation, and it ought to be. It really ought to be. And but no, it's just oh yeah, we're volunteers, but we're not a volunteer. we're different, right? Because we're on the board, that makes us important or something. I don't know, but
it's up here somehow. Yeah.
Oh yeah, we're floating away up on this little cloud up here and looking down on all the rest, on the volunteers. Yeah, exactly.
I know, and I find that to be kind of an interesting conundrum or catch-22, in that get the board on board, but when you're onboarding the board, they also really need a volunteer orientation, not just here's the history of the agency and what you'll be doing, but here's the policies around meeting notes, recording your hours, whether you do that or someone else does that. And the places where I've worked for government agencies with elected boards, I've still pushed this point that, like, yeah, they're getting like $100 a month stipend as an elected board member, and they get elected every 2 years, but realistically, it's such a small government agency, and it's a passion project that everyone's been here for 10 years. And the board members do change occasionally, but it's pretty much the same founders. And
Right.
but when I came on board with a land agency and said, can I help because there's a clerk of the board role, there's certain, government roles, like, hey, clerk of the board, we're pals, can I actually give you just a little bit of ways to track the data of this board beyond the meeting notes that have to get published? And they were grateful, because people don't think about it if they're in those positions of clerk of the board or board management, or sometimes even executive directors who answer to the board, are kind of afraid to put any policies. And I came up with a communication plan. I'm like, can we have a communication plan for the board? And no one's getting punished, but we're just putting some guardrails in, some ethical and communication policies that are good governance. And everyone was like, that's amazing. Like,
Yeah.
okay.
And you think that organizations would want that, because in a lot of cases, if you're looking for grant money, the number of volunteer hours that you have, well,
Mm-hmm.
here's some volunteer hours that are just sitting there that
There's like
nobody's
1,000
counting.
extra right there every year. There's like 1,000 extra hours to add into the grant. I know.
Yeah.
And most of the time it was, fortunately, in that agency where I stayed a long time, it was accepted really well. But other nonprofits, it's been like, what are you talking about? We're the board, we're the bosses.
Yeah.
Nobody's the boss of us. It's like, less about being the boss of you and more about just like good
And
governance, but
and if
okay.
you're sitting
I
there
tried.
thinking you're the boss, you're not helping. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. You're there for the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
That sorry, there I can get on a rant about that one.
We can absolutely rant about that, because I get tapped for board development, advice, sometimes one-off workshops, sometimes deeper contracts, and really turns into change management a lot of the time, like kind of a cultural shift. But this is rant worthy, and so I'm all for having a good chunk of our priceless advice today be about like good governance and board development, because that's another pipeline of, you don't necessarily want the same people there for 10 or 20 years unless they themselves are constantly evolving and growing and changing and coming up with new ideas. And some people are capable of that, but most don't bother once they're kind of comfortable in any role.
And even if you are good at accepting new ideas, we all have blind spots.
Yes.
We all have biases, things that we just never thought of, that it just, because of how we were raised or where we were raised or any of that, there are just things that we just don't know exist.
Mm-hmm.
And the more we can bring diversity in, and diversity not only in cultures and in ethnicities and things, but in ages and socioeconomic groups and things like that, and welcome them in, not just, oh, we've got our token youth or our token this or token
Here's our
that.
token Gen Z. It's like,
Yeah, exactly. But if we actually welcome them and their thoughts and ideas, we all become stronger. We can see things that otherwise we're blind to. And I think that's one of the biggest faults is probably the wrong words, but the biggest weaknesses of most boards are because we are 90% from the same sector, the same age group, the same culture, the same socioeconomic groups, things like that. And when you are all looking this way, mm-hmm. your focus gets narrower and narrower, and you have to change that. And the only way you can do that is bring different people in.
Yeah, and get new voices and new perspectives and fresh ideas and experiences.
And listen to them when they're there. Don't just sit them in a corner saying, okay, now we're diverse. It doesn't work that way.
It doesn't. And that's its own hot topic. And I'll link to, Brianna with Dorelis with Connecting the Cause, and Faiza Vinzant, CCVA, have done great work. Mira Barger's done great work around this, and other CVA people who've been on the channel before. That if you want token diversity, or there's too homogenous of any population, it could be that, all it's mainly Mandarin Chinese speakers, and and someone comes in speaking Cantonese on a, North Beach, San Francisco North Beach board. That was a board that I worked with a lot. It's like there was a huge deal that someone was a Cantonese speaker, and I'm like, are we serious? Like we're helping youth in Chinatown, and this is what we're hanging up on. And it was, and it was taken very, very seriously. But when you're welcoming whatever, however defining diversity, when you're welcoming that in, if you're welcoming people into a hostile environment and the floor is lava and they're dismissed and there's microaggressions or macroaggressions or flat out bigotry, like that is no good whatsoever. And that happens all the time. I've witnessed it happening. I've tried to course correct it when I've had the power to do it, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. And then I've watched those new board members just turn right around and go back out the revolving door because it's not like you said, truly welcoming. So what are some of your ways of welcoming that you've seen be successful, either you as a board member coming into a new situation, or that you've witnessed from the sidelines?
Well, before I get into that, there
Yeah.
is something I wanted to mention. Now, this was several months ago now. I read an article about a Chicago museum that got rid of their entire
docent volunteer program. Yep. Chicago Art
and
Institute. Yep. Yep.
because that's right. That was the Artist Institute. And it was because they couldn't change it piecemeal.
Yeah.
If they wanted to change the
scratch.
culture, they had to start from scratch. And there was a ton of backlash about it. But I was thinking, I can see why you'd do that.
Yeah.
You know, it is often too hard to change an individual piece and then expect the whole thing to change. It can happen, but it would take forever. And they decided it wasn't worth it. So kudos to them, and well done. I haven't heard how successful it was. I'd be really interested in a follow-up to that. Have you heard anything?
I know that I heard about the initial backlash, and I did have other conversations with colleagues, a couple in different podcasts, not this own channel, that the biggest part of the backlash was that there's always a big overlap, especially in museums or zoos that utilize docents or educational volunteers. There's a huge overlap in the donors, high level donors being the same volunteers or docents. So part of it was not being on the inside and not knowing. Like, I admire that this is so culturally broken that we have to kind of scorch it and start from scratch. And there might have been, I heard hints that there was such staff animosity towards the docent council that it could have been like an inside hit job, or it could have been cleaning house for a different bad cultural reason. And so I'm interested to see, I think it was about 6 or 8 months ago, so I'm interested to see in like a year and kind of circle back. But they lost a lot of important donors. There was backlash in the community from the wealthy white patrons that were many many of their docents, and other community groups said, great, because we're in Chicago and there hasn't been a black person on your docent council like ever, or there's been two out of in 50 years, there's been two, or so
Yeah.
It's interesting to see if we ever get a good follow-up journalistic exploration of what really happened, because through friends and colleagues who were adjacent to the situation, but none that I knew directly in that museum, but knowing about zoos and museums and being connected to those networks, there was definitely, this was a really polarizing event of like, how could you? And then other, so justice and equity advocates saying sometimes there's no other way, and it was really brave to do it that way. But yeah, it's like not everyone's gonna take that risk or have the courage or the meanness or however it's perceived from the outside world to make such a drastic change, because doing such a drastic change that immediately with such repercussions is going to be hard for any organization to do, let alone a very public facing thing like an art institute and a museum.
Yeah. And in a lot of cases, especially with smaller organizations or anything like that, it isn't necessary to do that. I can see why they did it in that case, because it was so entrenched.
Hmm.
And the amount of backlash says how entrenched it was, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's there are ways of doing it. And I was on a or listened in on a panel on equity diversity here in British Columbia,
Hmm.
and one of the speakers said something that really caught me, and he said, we can't create diversity for people,
Right.
we have to co-create it with them,
Yes.
right? And I think when I try and work with a board or with a program to bring more diversity in, that's where I come from.
Hmm.
Is okay, we can't just change policies and change things like that. That's not going to do anything. Bring someone in and work with them, and then we'll get that much bigger. And then we bring someone from a different group in and
Hmm.
work with them and get that much bigger. We have to co-create it. We
Right.
can't create a new culture on our own.
Yeah, because it's not, you're not dictating changes. You can nudge and see where the culture is already going or where it needs to evolve to, and where there's resistance, and finding those champions, cheerleaders, advocates, allies that already exist, and understanding again that idea of radical welcome. And Sue Carter Call, Dr. Sue's talked about this. I know Beth Steinhorn's talked about this. So again, this is just a hot topic, and
Right.
nobody owns these ideas. These are just in conversation in the sector of how do you do that safe welcome, and make sure that there's that comfortable onboarding or place to land, safe space to land, that allows for differences. It allows for that diversity to expand and to become more open and more welcoming, and widen that circle and that talent pool of who's drawn to, who's resonating with the mission and the culture while it's undergoing these changes, and understanding that you lose people along the way. And my favorite phrase, jerk is not a protected class. So if someone's been resistant to certain kinds of progress or change, that can be their invitation to go. Or they self-select to go, that like, I'm not going along with this. And like, that's everybody's choice to make, is to go along or not go along with whatever
And
resonates.
if they choose to leave because different groups are coming in, wave goodbye.
Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
like,
you're better off without them. Terribly
yeah,
sorry, but
yeah.
that's the way it is.
Yeah, yeah. And I think there's been that fear. I was just watching, I was actually just watching a great TV show, Julia, on HBO Max. So I'm not getting paid to plug this, but they're at a public television station in the 60s, and someone says, "I can't fire you. You're a volunteer." And that, like, I almost jumped off the couch. I got so upset. I'm like, this is it. This is just a story. We're just watching TV. It's like, you absolutely can be fired. Like, whether or not you should be fired is a different discussion within the plot of the show. But it's like, but just like a staff person saying, I can't fire you, you're a volunteer, but we're doing something different, and it may or may not work for you anymore. And to their credit, the character played by BB North said, "Let me decide that.
Right.
Tell me what's changing, and let me decide how much I go along with. And then if you need to hire a production assistant as a paid person, like, do that too."
Right.
And but that's that other thing that I think, newer to the career, volunteer coordinators, leaders of volunteers think, am I allowed to fire someone? Or there's other staff around them that think we're not allowed to fire volunteers. And I'm like,
And
that
sometimes it's the best thing you can do.
that takes the bad apple, the rotten apple out of the barrel, or it takes the toxic attitude out of the culture. And again, in older institutions, museums, zoos, certain large national or international charities that have been around for 50 or 100 years, sometimes the culture hinges on not just the founders and the hierarchy, but there's very specific, not great at their jobs, not very, very toxic people who are toxic, who are kind of the linchpins. And when you start to identify, like, who's that really toxic, gossipy, talking down to people, pissing everybody off personality, like, no amount of genius in any sector is worth, the jerk factor.
Yeah.
There isn't. Geniuses don't have to be jerks, and
Mhm.
particularly in volunteer sector, we don't get paid enough to work with people who are awful. so,
Exactly.
so
Exactly.
let's clean
Yeah.
house when we need to clean house.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I did a blog. It was another quite popular one on can I fire a volunteer? Absolutely.
Shortest blog ever. Yes, you can.
Yes, you can.
And
Yes.
scene.
And here are the ones to watch for.
Yeah, and I liked your comparison of the different kinds of bad apples, and that reminded me of I still have the it's still a popular webinar of uh, hold 'em or fold 'em. So I kind of use card game metaphor, poker metaphors. Do you hold or fold volunteers, or they're good and bad, and kind of categorizing some archetypal personality types or certain traits that can be toxic within a workplace or just be dysfunctional within a workplace, whether the
Right.
person's trying to be a mean person or not. And I think it can, we don't want to generalize, but yeah, there are certain ways of communicating or personality types or types of bad apples or types of conflict that we can definitely recognize and say, we're just going to we're going to try to sort that out and have people recognize that that behavior isn't going to fly if they join this team. And hopefully that helps them self-select away from this opportunity because we're not putting up with toxic gossip or punching down or shenanigans and all of these other kinds of controlling, micromanaging my volunteers, like all of that kind of stuff. But I loved your do you remember off the top of your head the bad apple metaphors that you used? Because I remember I really liked them.
I don't know if I can remember them all,
Okay.
but
Some of the bad apples get out of the barrel.
Well, one was Granny Smith, and I said, first
Yeah,
of all, it
too
has nothing to
sour.
do with age or
Yeah.
gender, but these are the ones who are entrenched, and this is the way we've always done it, and so
Mm-hmm.
therefore this is the way we always have to do it. So that's one, and those ones you can sometimes talk out of or convince or work out, but if they are stuck and they are not going to change, then sometimes it's better to get rid of them. If you're trying to progress your organization in a certain direction and they're saying no, then it's better to lose them.
Yeah, if it's pure resistance, no matter what the ideas are, just because it's not their ideas, then that's never gonna balance out.
Right. There was the gala apples. These are the ones who are here just because it's fun and I'm doing it. But when they only do the fun stuff and they won't do the dirty work or the harder stuff, or they don't bother putting in their hours, or they just want to do the fun stuff,
Mm-hmm.
that can be great there because they're really fun people to have around. But if something more fun comes up, they might just drop their shift that time and not bother telling anybody, and so you end up having to backfill and excuse them all the time.
Yeah.
And that can huge chunk of time away from you as a leader to try and cover all the things that they aren't covering, even though it's part of their role.
I think another point that your blog, and I'll link to your blog article so we can all
Okay.
remember the apple metaphors. So I'm not looking at it right now, and I'll link to my archetypes too, and just like this is a cool comparison of ways to frame it and look at it. And the commonality is that when someone is problematic, they can take too much of your energy from people who are great or developing that talent pipeline or helping to set up train the trainers so that Jackie, with her archival knowledge of the last 30 years as a founder of the agency, her secrets don't go with her when she leaves the agency, and that too often we're putting so much energy and attention into the jerks, the bad apples, the gossip queens or kings um, that becomes unwelcoming to the people who are doing a good job, who are being really good at it, because there isn't necessarily a positive reinforcement. Like there isn't time to acknowledge the good work of the rest of the team sometimes when someone is pulling attention and pulling focus all the time. And I've seen people leave because people who needed to be fired weren't fired. Not just personal
I've seen
toxicity
that
or they
more
didn't know
than I'd
someone, but
like
they're
to
like,
say.
if you can't handle that, why should I do good work here if you can't even handle that jerk? Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of times and then I've seen this as a volunteer, I'm doing all this work and that work is being undone
Yeah.
by somebody else. And so why bother? Right. And you just go, because I'm not making a difference, because every step I take, somebody else is pushing back.
Is undermining. And I'll expand on that. Hey, we're coming up with lots of new blog posts for you to write, or videos for me to do. That volunteers undermining each other, like, that needs to be stopped right away. Nip that in the bud. And I'm also in a situation with kind of helping someone who feels undermined at work. Like, their immediate boss is great, but their peers are just like trying to like knock her legs out from under her, trip her up at every opportunity. And it's to the point of like, I would like to continue in this job, and I like my immediate supervisor, but all the rest of these, you know,
Jerks.
knuckleheads, jerks, are, it's not worth it. And like, why am I working extra hard when 40% of it is undermined or undone by my people who are supposed to be on my team? And so I want to expand that works for whether you're paid or unpaid. If you're in a toxic culture of an agency, that it doesn't matter what size agency, this can happen at any moment. If take care of yourself, and whatever steps you can do to if you can't fix it yourself, then jump ship and put your career, your next job in a different direction. And the easiest time to look for a job is when you have one. So
yes.
That was kind of the advice I said. It's like, if this isn't better with the changes that we know are coming in the next few months at your organization, like, I will help send you jobs that I think you can do, because it's not worth it. It's not worth it.
Yeah. You can't spend a third of your life being miserable. You just can't.
Yeah.
Right?
Or more.
Yeah.
Our hours get so wacky sometimes. So, Karen, as we're wrapping up, are there any other bits of priceless advice that you'd like to offer? Any closing thoughts or things that we didn't manage to cover in our conversation so far?
Can I plug my book?
Plug your book. Yes, that's right. I almost forgot to mention your book. Plug your book.
One of the things, I mean, we're just talking, leaders and volunteers don't have a ton of time. Yeah. But they still need the training, they still need the inspiration of things. And so I wrote an ABC book for volunteers. Yay. I don't know if you can read it the right way.
I'm showing it. Yeah, and I'll put the link to grab it. And it's for any age. It's not a kid's book or coloring book.
No, it is for leaders and volunteers, and it's all about everything to do with volunteers. It's all about leading. So
I love it.
It's appreciation, and it's just an ABC book, and it's maybe a 10-minute read or something like that, but it's got a lot of information in it, a lot of tips and ideas on ways to make your program better, and ways to care for yourself as well. So,
and I love it in that, I mean, I love that easy kind of format where I'm working on a book that's a medium serious book, and it's of course taking much longer than you ever think, because bandwidth being bandwidth. But it's that balance of like, well, I have a lot of ideas that could be like hardcore, nitty gritty, deep dive stuff, and then there's your book, and Nicole R. Smith's book is really great too, of just like the journal for things. But then there's stuff that we need that is like a little bit lighter and a little more easy access to, just like, boop, I just need to get this little positive thought today, or this positive affirmation, or this, or the ABCs just really quick. I know even if it's a 10 or 15 minute read, I know it didn't take you 10 minutes to write it. So what was we have a little bit of time here. What was the timeline and process of getting that published? Because that's an extraordinary accomplishment in itself.
It started when the person who's helping me with marketing my business said, you need something to give away on your website. So write a book, write an ebook. Just did some really quick thing. And I started, but it ended up being a really serious book, like how to lead volunteers, and it got longer and longer, and I thought, okay, this isn't going to work.
This isn't a quick little giveaway.
Months,
yeah.
And so I said, okay, well, I've got to do something a little bit different. And it's in the other room. I've got a book by Seth Godin, the marketing guru, called ABCs of Marketing, or something like that. But Seth Godin did an ABC book, and I thought, that's it. that's what I'm going to do.
And that's a
And
great format in any sector, is the ABCs of something. Yeah.
something, yeah. So I just kind of looked into that, and then I just started, well, what would A be? Well, appreciation, that's kind of the obvious one. Then I just went through, and then you get stuck on the X.
Yeah.
Or what are you
Or
going to
the
do?
Z.
Or the Z, right?
Z, yes. The
Or
Z.
Z, yes, I'm Canadian. It has to be Z.
Z top, yes, the Z.
But it ended up being really a fun project, and each thing, it's just like 2 or 3 paragraphs, if that, just really quick things on the basics of belonging, making your volunteers, or making volunteers feel like they belong. And then I thought, okay, well, an ABC book has to be illustrated, and there is no way I'm going to do that. That's not going to happen. And I had come across a sketch note, and I tagged it on one of my blog posts. I got the author's permission to put this sketch note out, and everybody loved the sketch note. And I thought, okay, well, that's what I'll do. I'll get somebody to do sketch noting. And then I went looking around, and I couldn't find it, and everybody. And it turned out that I thought, I'm going to end up having to do this myself. So I took a sketchnoting course
on the
internet, which was really quite fun, but I'm still no good at it. And knew it would never get done if I had to do that. But that course had a community attached to it. And I put an ad in their community thing saying, I'm looking for someone to help me illustrate a book. And this is kind of basically what it's about. And a guy from Laval, Quebec, reached out, and we've become fast friends, and we had a blast doing it. And he did all the illustrations, and I mean, I love what I wrote, but I think his illustrations make the book. So
it always levels it up. Yeah.
Benoit Leclerc, you are the greatest.
Well, I'll link to everything in the video description of this Priceless Advice conversation. And thank you so much, Karen. And well, we didn't record the first talk, which was also amazing and lovely. And I think today has been amazing and lovely. And it's good to just get caught up with you. And again, I'm just so excited to see the book, the blogs, the writing for journals. It's really wonderful to watch a writing career in the sector blossom like yours has in the last year or so. So I'm just glad that we could find the time to chat today and get so many of your wonderful Tuesday tips in there as well.
I was so honored that you reached out to me. I feel so pleased that you thought of me.